Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of Islamic Reminders Institute, I welcome you, brothers and sisters, to our this next session. As you know, we are continuing our lecture series, Talk on Weekends. So this is our second in the same series. We'll be continuing from the last one. As you know, the today we have with us Ustadh Humayun Khan. Before we begin with our topic today, let me give you a small introduction about him. He's a graduate of Arabic language from Egypt. He has been studying and been graduate from for Arabic language. Along with, he has been certified public speaker from Kalam Institute. He has been very involved in and out from that institute. He has been really involved with all the faculty teachers from that institute. He has been giving regular khutbas and talks sessions online and on-site uh, in USA, in Dallas, as well as in South Florida. He has been very active, very young, very enthusiastic, teaching, learning. You can say we can learn from him not only as a teacher, but as a student. As he learns and he teaches, we should be inspired from him, how he deals with the way of communication, the way of teaching. So, without further delay, let me hand it over to Ustad Humayun Khan for today's session. Over to you, Sheikh.
Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you guys are doing well, inshallah. Really glad everyone could join. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah into it and reward and accept. I mean, let's get started, inshallah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We begin with the name of Allah. We praise Allah. We thank Allah. We send peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, upon the Sahaba, and upon the entire Ummah, past, present, and future. Rabbi Shahli Sadri wa Yassir li Amri wa Halul Uqdatan min Lisani yafqahu qawli. O Allah, open for me my chest, make my task easy for me, and loose the knots on my tongue so that I may understand my speech. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. So today's today's topic is the believer's identity crisis. Who am I in the eyes of Allah versus the world? In the early days of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ and his followers were under immense pressure. The Quraysh were very frustrated. Islam was spreading, and their power, their idol worship economy was at risk. So what did they do? They came to Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, with what they called a solution. They came to him with a solution. And they said, let's make a deal. We will give your nephew Muhammad bin Abdullah ﷺ, we'll give your nephew kingship, wealth, women, whatever he wants if he stops his message. And they said this in the name of peace, of social harmony, but in reality, it was spiritual blackmail. And they wanted Islam to conform to their corrupted worldview. And so, how did the Prophet ﷺ respond? He said, Wallahi, by Allah, I swear by Allah, لو وضعوا الشمس في يميني والقمر في يساري. By Allah, if they were to place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, على أن أترك هذا الأمر حتى, I would not abandon this mission until يظهر الله أو أهلك فيه ما تركته, until Allah causes it to prevail or I perish in the process, the Prophet said. And so what the Quraysh were calling a compromise, the Prophet ﷺ was recognizing as capitulation, as an act of surrendering. And so they claimed that they were being peacemakers, but their peace was built on injustice, on silence, on preserving power. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 11, an ayah that we have heard plenty in the last 2 years especially, قال الله وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون. And when it is said to them, do not cause corruption on the earth, we're only peacemakers, reformers. And so Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he actually comments on this ayah. He says these hypocrites are the ones who cause real corruption, where they are harming the truth, they're mocking the righteous, but they sincerely think that they're helping. And one of the other scholars, Al-Qurtubi, he says, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands are rejected or misrepresented in the name of reform, that is the greatest corruption. And so this is the danger of losing spiritual sight. You commit evil thinking it's good because your scale is no longer receiving. Your scale is no longer revelation. And so redefining right and wrong, this type of reform is rebellion against the divine order. And so when someone disconnects ethics from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance, even murder looks like justice. And then the opposite, injustice, looks like peace. And so in Islam, just to highlight oppression, the different types of oppression, when you look at the linguistic and also the linguistic meaning, dhulm, it means to put something in other than its proper place. Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, he said to misplace a right, whether by violating it or neglecting it. And there's three levels of dhulm. Number one is dhulm against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is by associating partners with Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna shirka la dhulmun azimun. Indeed, shirk is a great, dhulm is a great oppression. Number two, the no, sorry. Number two, you look at dhulm against creation through lies, through injustice, through abuse, through war. The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it in the Quran where He says, وَالظَّالِمُونَ مَا لَهُم مِّن نَصِيرٍ, and the wrongdoers will have no helper. Right? When it comes to dhulm against creation, it could be killing or harming others unjustly, as is what's going on in Palestine, what's going on overseas, so many different places with oppression. You could be stealing, it could be backbiting, it could be lying in business, it could be cheating in inheritance, it could be what's going on across the world, right? So anytime we harm another person's body, their wealth, their dignity, or their rights, we're committing dhulm. And the third type of dhulm, the third type is dhulm against oneself, which is through sin, which is through laziness, which is through spiritual neglect. And this could be missing salah, this could be delaying it without excuse, this could be falling into a sin, a bad habit without turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this could be ignoring the Quran, ignoring the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or believing that our sins are too great to be forgiven, despairing in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So spiritual negligence is also a form of oppression, but the victim is ourself. The victim is yourself. And so the great is those who live without purpose. And for many of us, read and we listened to the Quran for years. We read translations, we read tafsir, we read commentary. There are ayahs that we thought that would never be put into action into our time. Right? This ayah that I mentioned earlier, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. This ayah of Surah Al-Baqarah is being lived across the globe. And Allah subhanahu in the translation, and when it is said to cause corruption on the earth, they say we're only peacemakers and reformers. You look at people who are bombing, what's happening in Gaza, bombing hospitals and homes, but they're calling it self-defense, right? There are regimes that normalize oppression with while their own citizens are crying for justice, and all of them are saying we are only but reformers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees beyond the press releases and advises all of us, warns all of us, forbids us, you and I. He says in Surah Hud, do not incline towards the oppressors, lest the fire touch you. Now, when wrong feels right and why it happens. In every era, in every generation, including our generation, including this time and era, and especially today, wrong often feels right. People will defend sin with passion. They will stand for injustice with pride, and they'll promote falsehood with sincerity. And here are some major reasons why this happens. The first reason is social pressure. Most people, they don't worship idols as was done back during the time of the Quraysh, before the Prophet ﷺ. Most people don't worship idols, they worship acceptance. We live in a culture where social approval is currency. If your views don't align with the dominant narrative, you're silenced, you're shamed, you're cancelled. The Prophet ﷺ talked about this time, ﷺ, that there will come a time, he says in the hadith in Tirmidhi, that there will come a time when the one holding onto his religion, onto his or her religion, will be like one holding onto a burning coal. And so this could be a Muslim, this could be a young Muslim youth who stays quiet about their beliefs while they're in college discussions around some of their classmates. Maybe they don't want to speak up, not because they disbelieve, but because they fear being isolated. And when it comes to the crisis of duality, right? A lot of us sometimes we have number one, a social media persona, right? We have carefully crafted posts on Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media it is, and we present our best version, but not our real version. And number two, when it comes to our spiritual reality, the heart may be neglected and the soul feels lost even when our likes on social media increases. And the Prophet ﷺ, he actually says this in the hadith. He says, indeed, Allah does not look at your appearance or your wealth, but He looks at your heart and your deeds. And so, in a world that's obsessed with aesthetics, the believer focuses on authenticity. Now, the second reason why people may justify when wrong feels right, when you experience this type of crisis, when you experience this, especially when we're talking about identity crisis, the second reason is a lack of a revelation based moral compass. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in the Quran in Surah Al-Jathiyah, ayah 23. Have you, in the translation, have you seen the one who takes their desires as their God? So when people disconnect from the Quran and the Sunnah, they begin using their feelings or even popular opinion as a moral compass, as something that's going to guide them. And this leads to people saying what's right for you may not be right for me. But the truth doesn't change based on trends or tiers. For example, you can say, oh, prayer is not spiritual enough for me. Or modesty, that's just a cultural thing, without understanding the divine instruction by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In America, we have a very famous boxer who passed away, who ended up becoming Muslim in his life and became this icon, Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah. And he very famously, in one of his interviews, he actually said, I'd rather stand with God and be judged by the world than stand with the world and be judged by God. Right? He said this. Now, a third reason why someone may justify or be even going through a crisis or whatnot, or when someone may justify when wrong feels right, rather, is when language is changed. Terms like freedom, choice, identity, rights, they're rebranded to push immorality. Truth is painted as hate, sin is framed as love, right? You look at what's happening with oppression and what we mentioned earlier. Malcolm X, rahimahullah, he very, very famously he said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppression. So these false narratives, this language manipulation, even in this case, they're designed to make the oppression feel like peace and the truth look like rebellion. A fourth reason why we may justify when wrong feels right could be financial interest. Sometimes wrong feels right because it's profitable. The Quraysh, going back to the first thing I mentioned, the Quraysh didn't just oppose the Prophet ﷺ because of the theology, because of their creed. They feared losing power, money, business that was tied to their idol worship. And you see how all these industries right now that are built on, you know, the interest, arms trade, right, smoking, pornography, whatever it could be. A Muslim, an example could be a Muslim chooses to work for an unethical company, or they promote haram products on social media, justifying it with, I need to provide for my family. The Prophet ﷺ tells us as a reminder in Musnad Imam Ahmad, a body that's nourished with haram will never enter paradise. Right? Now, the fifth reason why we may justify or we may have this crisis or try to justify when wrong feels right, it may be desensitization over time. When sin becomes common, it stops feeling wrong. The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us, uh, you will follow the ways of those before you inch by inch. When modesty is mocked, when prayer is delayed, when haram is rebranded, you start adjusting your heart to what's normal and not what's true. Right? Maybe watching TVs or movies that are normalizing zina. Maybe they're normalizing disrespecting Islam. Right? And we're doing it because everyone else does it. So we're desensitized to it. Sometimes even just another bonus reason why people may justify wrong when wrong feels right, it may be because of trauma or grief or In moments of deep pain, people sometimes turn away from Islam, not they they hate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but because they don't understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom. They may fall into sin or rebellion as a coping mechanism. It could be that a sister removes her hijab after a personal loss, saying, "I just need to live for myself now." It could be a brother was making du'a, and in his eyes, the du'a went unanswered, and he stopped praying. So, these are the different reasons why this crisis could take place. Now, what should we do as practical guidance? What is Practically, what could we do as Muslims? Number one, and I'll mention maybe seven to eight practical guidance, inshallah ta'ala. Number one, what should we do? Anchor our values in the Quran and Sunnah. Reconnect with the Quran. The Quran shapes who you are, not just when it comes to even social media. It's not just what you post or what you portray. The Quran is really what shapes who you are. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was described by his wife Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha, she said he was the walking version of the Quran. So when it comes to let every ayah be a mirror and ask yourself, is this who I am? Right? And look at the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ has this model of authenticity. When the Prophet ﷺ had received revelation, his own people, his own tribe rejected him, mocked him. They did all they offered these compromises, and he didn't dilute his identity for acceptance. He stood firm even when standing alone. And if the Prophet ﷺ didn't compromise his identity for status, for fame, for comfort, neither should we. To be a believer means to live by principles, not by public opinion, right? Imam Malik rahimahullah very famously says, in terms of following the Sunnah is like the Ark of Noah, the Ark of Nuh alayhi salam. Whoever boards it is saved, and whoever turns away from it is drowned. So one practical step that we could take, one practical thing that we could do is just take the time, maybe every week, just study one ayah, one hadith, maybe read it daily, right? Choose to have clarity in your religion, in your Islam. It's not just what our parents said or how we were raised in our culture, but go back to the sources of Quran and Sunnah, right? And study one ayah a week or read a hadith daily. And Riyadh al-Salihin is a book people recommend. It's really clear, it's easy, it has topics. Those are practical steps we can take. Number two, seek to constantly purify your heart. We should always purify all of our hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights this in the Quran in Surah Al-Shams. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Successful indeed is the one who purifies it. And Imam Ghazali, he actually says the heart is like a mirror. When it's polished through dhikr and taqwa, God awareness, God consciousness, it reflects divine truth clearly. But when it's covered in sin, it only reflects desires. So begin your day, have your daily azkar, daily dhikr, daily remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make dua when you start in the morning, in the day. Oh Allah, make all of my deeds righteous, make them sincerely for your sake, and do not let anyone else have a share in them. Right? And avoid environments and influences that will normalize doing the opposite of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of normalizing sin, of bad influences. Surround yourself with spiritual reminders, right? As we're doing with MashaAllah Islamic Reminders Institute. Surround yourself with spiritual reminders, not distractions. Number three, be willing to stand alone with the truth. If we look back at Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights him in the Quran. He says, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi. Indeed, Ibrahim alayhi salam was a nation in himself, devout obediently to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was all alone, but he stood up against all that shirk, all that polytheism, all the idol worshipping that was going on at that time. He stood alone. Right? If you look in another place, a surah that we recite every week, or we should be, inshallah, on Fridays, Surah Al-Kahf. One of the stories that's highlighted in Surah Al-Kahf is the story of the youth of the cave. And these youth, they were actually surrounded by a society that idols, that followed trends, and that rewarded. But they walked away from it in, in order to do what? In order to preserve their faith. They didn't care about followers. They only cared about following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when you're grounded in who you are before Allah, you don't need the validation of anyone else. Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, very famously says, the one who walk it alone, but they are never lonely if they walk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a story, when he was rejected at Ta'if, during the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, there was one year called Amul Huzn, the year of sorrow. One of the events that took place that is categorized in that year, that is recorded from that year, is when he went to Ta'if to go call them to Islam, to go and receive support, because he had just lost his wife Khadija radiallahu anha of 25 years. He had just lost his uncle Abu Talib, who had raised him, who had nurtured him, who supported Islam but did not verbally taking the Shahada. And he went to Ta'if for help, and to really to call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every single person rejected him from the city. And he, while on his way out, he actually was pelted with stones, bleeding and humiliated. And he ended up, after that whole 2-3 miles of walking, he actually ends up collapsing, and then he makes a dua that shakes, a very long and lengthy dua. But in it, just to highlight one point that he said, "Oh Allah, to you I complain of my weakness, my helplessness, and my humiliation before men." And then he says, "If you're not angry with me, Allah, then I don't care." And that's what the believer's identity should be. As long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased, the world's opinion doesn't matter. The opinion of my family doesn't matter. The opinion of my children doesn't matter. The opinion of my spouse, the opinion of my friends, my circles, whatever it is, doesn't matter. As long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased, the world, no, nothing else matters. So be comfortable with sometimes having to be countercultural, and know that truth has always been the path of the few, not the many. Number 4, another practical advice tip: we should preserve our wealth and provision from haram, right? We should look at the things that we're involved in when it comes to our money, whether it's our income or side hustles or whatever we're doing online, whatever our family is involved in. We shouldn't justify haram with desperation. Risk, sustenance is guaranteed, but barakah, with blessings, is not. Number 5, this is a very important advice in order to help fight this crisis that believers may face, is maintaining strong suhbah, righteous companionship. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah very famously says, "He who mixes with the righteous is affected even if they don't if this person doesn't realize it, just as," and he compares it to perfume. Oud, itr. Just as perfume clings to the clothes of the ones who sells it, you end up smelling like you end up smelling whatever you're around. So the advice here is to seek companionship that elevates you. The Prophet says, "A person is upon the religion of their closest friend." So look at the people around you. One of the advices people say is the 5 people closest to you. Just evaluate those people in your life, and you'll see where you are. You'll see where you are in terms of Deen. You'll see where you are in terms of your religion. You'll see where you are in understanding. You'll see where you are in what you engage in terms of good deeds versus. Surround yourself with people who remind you of Allah more than they remind you of any. Be in gatherings of knowledge and dhikr. Replace toxic friend groups, family groups, with those that remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like this gathering here, like the session here. Number 6, remember accountability and akhirah often, right? Ask yourself, would I still do this if no one saw it but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And one tip, one advice that scholars will give, teachers will give, is practice hidden acts. Give secret charity. Make dua in private. Do good deeds without waiting for someone else to notice, without waiting for someone else to say don't worry about the thank you. Just do it primarily for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So try to recenter who you are before Allah. And whenever you're about to engage in an action, think about this: would I want this Yawmul Qiyamah, on the Day of Judgment? Number 7, the last advice when it comes to uh, having type of crisis, or when wrong people may justify when wrong feels right. Tip: the final one I mentioned is guard your tongue and your influence. Guard your tongue and your influence. Be a voice of Furqan, of clear distinction. When it comes to oppression, speak out against it. When it comes to moral confusion, speak up against it. When you hear something, you're like, that doesn't sound right, speak up. Try use your tongue for khair, for goodness. And when it comes to influence, limit comparison. The Prophet ﷺ would tell us in Hadith of Bukhari and Muslim, look to those below you, not those above you. And so even what happens on social media fuels insecurity, right? Don't fall into that. Don't fall into the insecurity. This person has this, I don't have this. This person got this, I didn't get that. Comparison. Limit the things that influence you. And just to close it off, the Prophet ﷺ tells us in Abu Dawood in the Hadith, a believer is the mirror of another believer. A believer is the mirror of another believer. But before we reflect others, we have to first reflect ourselves to see who we are before our Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when the world asks you, who are you? Let your heart answer and say, I am a servant of Allah. Before I'm a student, before I'm a worker, before I'm an influencer, before I'm a citizen, before anything else, I'm a servant of Allah. My worth, my value is not measured by others, but by making sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? When it comes to social media, likes come from the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not from the screen, not from the social media platform. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our private selves better than our public ones. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our public selves righteous. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us of what He knows about of us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to maintain our identity when it gets difficult, when it gets hard to be a Muslim, when it gets hard to practice our religion, when we might go through some kind of confusion. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us clarity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us of all of our sins, past, present, and future. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to die upon the sunnah of our messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and allow us to be resurrected with him on the day of judgment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us on the day of judgment to drink from the hands of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam when everyone is thirsty, and allow us to drink from the hands of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam from the rivers of the Kawthar in Jannah. And we ask you, Allah, oh Allah, allow us to meet you on the day of judgment and hear you say these blessed words, O my slave, I am pleased with you, you are forgiven, enter your Jannah freely. Ameen wa bil alameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. I have questions that were sent beforehand. Inshallah, one of them, let me just pull it up. If you had to, number one, if you had to give advice to a younger Muslim lady, what would that advice be? What would you say? You know, one of the things I would mention is looking at the different influences in our lives. What are the main influences that we are involved in? Is it our phone? Is it our social circles? Is it school? Is it work? When it comes to identity, what you involve yourself with will have an impact on your identity. What you're influenced by will have an impact on your identity, right? And really building up that identity is alongside influences is your actions. Is how much are you putting towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How much are you trying to learn about your religion? How much are you trying to improve? How much are you trying to clarify what it means? What have you looked up in the Quran, in the Sunnah, in the Sirah? What does Allah want from me as a Muslim? What does the Prophet ﷺ, what did he carry himself as? So these are things that I would give advice about identity is don't just take Islam for what we were raised with, but really for your own self, seek truth, seek advice from the right individuals, be around the right gatherings, and especially go back to the sources of Quran and Sunnah. I always like to recommend when it comes to identity, the best lens to have, and this is an advice that scholars will give every single year when it comes to Ramadan, we do a revision of the Quran, right? Scholars say you should go through the Quran at least once. The other advice that scholars will add to that, and this is what I like to remind people, especially when it comes to identity, is building a seerah lens. And the second advice is every single year you should be going through and rereading the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Whether it's going through a podcast, whether it's going through a lecture, whether it's reading a shorter book, I know it may seem redundant when it comes to asking about identity or whatnot, but every single year, when we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, it applies to us differently. If you look back, any of us, whether we're young, old, whatever age demographic we're at, every single year is different. Think about where you and I were last year at this time on October 4th, 2024. What was I doing? What was I engaged in? What was my highlight? What was my mindset? Maybe I was dealing with such and such difficulty. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted me such and such gift. But now this year I'm dealing with something else. This year I'm dealing with blessings. This year I'm dealing with a tragedy. This year I'm dealing like, and when you look at the seerah and you create a lens crafted around the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll see how you can relate back and forth between your own life. Where every single year you'll see, man, the Prophet ﷺ also endured this to a certain degree. The Prophet ﷺ endured this and showed us how to react and how to act. How did the Prophet ﷺ maintain such a strong identity? Right? So that's one advice I would give to someone who's younger, a younger Muslim about identity is really learn about the identity of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And limit or rather look at who's influencing you, and of course go and clarify and learn the Quran Sunnah. Don't just take whatever your parents had learned. Learn the Deen for yourself as well. Learn about Islam and focus on it, inshallah. Do you? The question is, do you think Muslims living in non-Muslim societies face a different kind of identity crisis compared to those in Muslim majority countries, and how could it be handled by us as youth? So definitely there's different kinds of identity crises. There's different types of reactions. If you are living in a non-Muslim society, in a non-Muslim country, the values, the ethics that we treasure so dearly in Islam, they're obviously not around us. They're not what surrounds our, what we see, what we hear. We go to work, we put on the radio. So if living in a non-Muslim society, myself living here in the U.S., living here, I'm in Dallas, Texas. There definitely is different identity crises that we're seeing. Especially now with the socio-political climate, where uh, there's a lot of phobia. There's a lot of, uh, you could say, people are scared. Some are scared of Muslims and what they could possibly do. Yeah, there's a different type of identity crisis versus going to a Muslim country or a Muslim society where going to the masjid is normal. The adhan being played publicly is normal, right? Dressing as a Muslim, dressing Islamically, that's normal, right? So there's different reactions, different conformities, different identity crises that could play a factor to that. And I think it, I would go back to the first response. How could it be handled by us as youth? Really, if you really just take the seerah, the life of the Prophet Sallallahu, you'll know how to live wherever you are. If you're in a non-Muslim society, you have to really stand up and stand out and know how to interact, especially with non-Muslims. You look back at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and how the Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ in specific dealt in Medina with Jews, right, with the Jewish tribes, with non-Muslims in their society, and how he dealt with them with fairness and kindness. And so there's different interactions that will take place when you're in a non-Muslim society versus in a Muslim society. If you from the seerah lens, it could be maybe not being lazy with Islam. Sometimes when you're in a Muslim society and that Muslim the culture is Muslim, sometimes we may become lazy and we may think, yeah, this is enough. I was born Muslim. I'm being raised in a Muslim society. I hear the adhan. Maybe I go to the masjid here and there, and I think I'm good. And so that you could highlight it as laziness. You could highlight it as conformity, rather. But that could be a different crisis that's being compared to being in a non-Muslim country or society versus a Muslim country or society. Third question, inshallah. So, what are the how can we what are the basic differences between Islam and non-Islamic religion in terms of religious identity and religious value? What significant value impact difference can be identified and observed?
Brother, the third question is like, how can we respond when our faith and environment clash? Like, for example, when we have a friends
Right.
and we are working, so we have different people and relationship. Based on that, we deal with them. How can we do that, or how can we balance that?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so when our faith and environment clash, the best way I would answer this is test everyone's experiences are going to be different. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts you through in whatever environment you are, I'm put through, whatever you're put through, it's going to be different. We're going to have these in our life, and because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us that He would test us, He would test believers, this La ilaha illallah that we have. And so, and challenges, especially when our environment may be pushing our faith, whether it's friends or family that are influencing us, and whether it's maybe education or some job that we know that will make us money, but then hey, it's not something that is rooted in Islam or rooted against Islam even. And so there are different challenges that we may be facing in our environment and the things that we're around. And so it's important for us to maintain a positive mindset and really, just going back to it, a strong relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and really focusing on the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and just understanding that tests, the challenges that we face, the environments that we face these tests in, they're not going to just disappear, but having Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's support, it makes challenges, it makes these clashes more manageable, right? And so I would recommend, again, just framing our mindset that tests are custom designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every single person's individual specific situation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people based on those challenges and the potential for growth, inshallah ta'ala. And that being tested really indicates the ability to overcome challenges. This other question: how Islamic faith is different?
No, that's it for today's. Brother,
Yeah.
we are running out of time. We already
Sure.
took 3 questions due to time constraint, and we have a set rule pattern. We cannot exceed the time. Thank you, Jazakallah Khair, for audience, for you for coming and giving us this wonderful lecture and giving us your sharing your knowledge and inspiring us to and motivating us, as well as good reminders in all the form, all the points you have. Just a reminder for those who join late, please try to come early next time, and we'll be sharing the recording in the group. You can have in within 24 hours for this session. We would like to end this talk with Ustadh Humayun Khan. We had a really wonderful experience, and you have enlightened us with your all the knowledge. And we would like to have you again next time with us, inshallah, in the future. With this, I would like to end today's topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
हम उसकी बात काटी
नहीं, वालेकुम अस्सलाम का क्या काटा है
उन्होंने काटा